Hi, this is Gary Haight Richardson, spelled H-A-I-G-H-T. And I want to start by thanking the Waddups and others who've made this possible. I've had a camera for years. Fran and I have been trying to do something like this and never got it started, so this is a delightful invitation. I was born in Grace, Idaho on the 30th of November, 1931. My parents were Stanley Solon Richardson and Maybelle Haight Richardson. Dad was the principal of the high school, and it was a big event when I was born, and it made the local newspaper, and the nurse was Sister Mather from across the street. She delivered thousands of infants. The doctor received $50, and Sister Mather got a bushel of apples. During our life in Grace, I played a lot with Marley Mather and others of the young boys. We had a situation where Marley and I used to play, and I don't know how we ever did this. At the age of 4, we got a hold of some firecrackers, and we would be out in the middle of the street, and we'd put a firecracker under a tin can and blow it into the atmosphere. We also got our dad's knives once, a butcher knife, and we decided to have a sword fight. I don't know where this idea was ever generated at that age and that time, but Grandma Haight was visiting, and she found that knife and absconded it and took it and put it on top of the breadboard. The bread box used to be up on the side of the wall in the corner in the kitchen so that they'd keep it away from the rodents. And so the knife was up there, and I could do no more sword fighting. Dad took me on the stage of the high school once and put a cowboy hat on me, and he had a little dialogue, and he said, well, what he called me, he says, how long have you lived here? And my response was, you see those mountains over there? Well, they was here when I come. And he had fun, the students had fun. One of the things happened later in life that embarrassed me a bit. I hated to go back to Grace because some of the women there would smile and say, oh, I remember you. And I couldn't figure out what. Finally, one of them told me that Sister Sorensen was the teacher of the home ec in the home ec department. She had me brought in one day so that the home ec girls could see how a baby was washed. So they remembered the fact that I was their subject. And from then on, I hated to go back to Grace for who would recognize me and remember that event. I did some things which my grandmother was upset about when she took care of me. Grandma Haight was called one day when I came running home, and I said, I have a problem. The boys told me that if I put my shoe in the side of the ditch by the culvert, it would go underneath the culvert and come up on the other side. It was like a boat, and it would just go right through the culvert. Well, it didn't. She and I spent considerable time trying to get that shoe, and we never did recover it. Dad was one of the first to get his education in both Haight and Richardson families. And so he took the opportunity to get a master's degree at the University of Idaho in Moscow. So at the age of 5, our family, and by that time my brother had joined us, Kent was born, and we moved to Moscow, Idaho, which is a hilly country, and Dad helped me build a little roller coaster to go up and down the hills. It wasn't much, a few boards, wheels, and ropes to steer, and it was a brake. I wanted a little shovel. a steam shovel that you could sit on and pull, and it would pick up dirt. It cost $1.85. And Dad said, now if you'd like to pick dandelions, I'll give you a nickel for every dandelion, and you can earn that. So this was my first job, and I earned it, and I enjoyed it, and I thought that was the greatest steam shovel around. Dad became state supervisor of education after he finished his time in Moscow. And we went to Boise. For 13 years, he was the state supervisor, and we had the opportunity to travel around the world with him, or around the state with him. He wore out a car about every 2 years. So I was raised in school-wise in Boise. Many precious memories of my activities there. In grade school, I found I was the slowest reader. I was dumbfounded in the first grade to find out that some of the other girls in the class knew how to read the Bible, and I had not spent any time reading anything. I was embarrassed once when I took a book home. The teacher required us to take books home and read them, and when I took it home and brought it back, I found out it was a first grade primer. So I was embarrassed to sneak it back in. One of the things I learned in my education was that I was a slow learner in some things, especially mathematics. And in the 4th grade, my teacher was the daughter of a gold miner from Idaho City. She was a tough customer. She was also the principal, and she hung a hose on the wall that she used for strapping people when they needed it. She kept me after school one day and said, "Gary, if you can't learn the multiplication tables, you'll never amount to anything." I learned that that should be something you never tell a student, because that block remained with me all my life. Even as a PhD teaching at the university, if I had a problem to put on the board, I made sure I wrote it down first and put it on, made sure that all the mathematics were correct. Thank heavens, I did, I think, amount to something, irrespective of what she said. The teenage years, you've got some indication here that I might want to do something like that. We had, my parents were very good at taking us on vacations. And they took their parents, because my grandfather never learned to drive. And so Dad and Mother would take them frequently to Yellowstone Park. We'd stay in a cabin and watch the bears around the cabins. And that was the only way they could travel. So when Dad had the car, by the way, he had the first car in both families, both the Haight and the Richardson families. He would take us on vacations, and we would have wonderful experiences on those vacations. Every year, Dad would have all the ag teachers meet at Sun Valley, Idaho for a conference. And of course, we would go along, and for about $7 a night, our whole family would be in a motel over in Ketchum. And I remember going to the lodge in Sun Valley, and it has a fake concrete, it has a fake wooden surface. If you go up and touch it, it is actually a concrete surface, which they've painted and textured as if it were wood. I would put my hand on that wall and wonder if the day would ever come that I would be able to afford to stay in that beautiful lodge. It was $44 a night. Fran and I have stayed there frequently since, and it's still very pricey, but I was able to finally get a chance to stay in that lodge. Let's get back to Boise. I had some wonderful experiences in the schools there. And when I got to high school, it was up on the Franklin bench. Franklin had a very small high school, and it couldn't field a very good football team and basketball and some of those things. I was able to take the lead in several of the plays, and I was also able to sing in the choir in Boise High when our high schools were consolidated. It's interesting, we had to consolidate in those days, and Boise was the only high school. Now there are 5 high schools that cover the same area in Boise and in Middleton, or Boise, and the nearby town has a new temple being built. My first job during World War II, my father was able to be free from being involved in the military because his work was so important to help teach the farmers to produce the crops needed to supply during those days. So he set up 16 factories in the state of Idaho, 16 canning systems. One of them was in Boise. So I got to work in that first cannery in Boise. People would bring their own produce in, cans would be provided, they would fill the cans, they would be steamed and autoclaved, and they would then take the cans of produce home. And all they had to do was pay for the cost of the cans. This was done throughout the state. Some of those canneries may still exist. I know the one in Preston still exists. So my first job was working there, and I remember some interesting events. In one case, the pressure was so great that it blew the lid from one of the pressure cookers. And Dad was always concerned about the young man in charge that allowed that to happen. On another occasion, 2 women started fighting over a pan to use to wash their produce, and I witnessed how women could be so upset over whether or not they had the entitlement to use some of those containers to process their food. Anyway, that was 25 cents an hour. Was pretty good in those days. I was standing in the backyard when Mother came out prior to this and announced that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And we were all so hit tragically when that happened. And at Gowan Field, the Air Force Base, they would have demonstrations that we would go out and watch. I remember they had gliders in those days that would be towed into the air, 3 gliders at once by an airplane. And each glider could carry a jeep or a bunch of soldiers. And they would bring those gliders down and land them, and they would roll them up, and they would park the glider front wheel on a dime, and then they would sell this dime for so many war bonds, thousands of dollars worth of war bonds. On another occasion, they had built a house, just a frame structure up several floors, and they would then put an incendiary bomb on the top and watch it burn through every floor all the way to the basement. These were very chilling instructions to let us know of the seriousness of some of the things that were happening. We had to close all of our windows and cover them. There were many B-24s that flew in and out of Gowan Field. I was standing in our front yard once and looked out and saw one of them fly along, catch fire, and crash. It was a very sobering experience for me to witness. I'm not sure when any of those got out alive who were in that plane. At Boise High School, I had the chance to decide whether I stayed in the band. At Fairmont, we had a little dinky band of about 25 people. I was first trumpet, and I had a silver horn, or just a cheap horn, and then I got a beautiful copper bell horn with gold and copper. And at that time, I wouldn't let the director whack on my horn to call attention to the band people. Don't you dare touch my... So I had to make the choice, choir or band. I made the choice of choir, and it was a tremendous experience. I got to be Mr. Interlocutor in the minstrel show. I got to be the lead in the musical. And I had a wonderful experience. I established an octet, still at Franklin. And this was 8 young men, and we sang some great music. We were on the radio once, and one time they invited us to come to a barn dance out in Meridian, Idaho, and sing at this barn dance. The problem was that my job at that time was to make the first ice cream for Albertsons. At that time, Albertsons had 5 stores, from Burley to someplace north of Boise. And so we made all the ice cream. And prior to that time, we had 2 shifts a day. And I got this job because I would not work on Sunday for the manager, let's see, can't think of his last name. He was the vice president of dairy products at Albertsons. And he said, don't ever get into the dairy science business when I left Boise. But Clicks Cannon was his name. He had Cannon's Ice Cream across the street from the Capitol building in Boise. And Click's business was so successful, he decided he was going to have to open it on Sunday. Well, I said, I'm sorry, I can't work on Sunday, and therefore I quit the job. A little later he came up and said, hey, we're going to manufacture our ice cream here in Boise. It's a 5-day job, 5 days a week. Would you come and help us? I said, yeah, I'd be delighted. So I went in, and that's where I was working at the time this octet was organized. Well, everything was fine. We had this little freezer, and we were putting out half gallons and 5s and quarts, 5 gallons and quarts. And here came the invitation for this octet. Just prior to this, Clicks Cannon came to us and said, Arden's Ice Cream in town has had a major fire. They can't make their ice cream until this is all repaired. We have 2 choices. We organize the 3rd shift a day, or you people work for 12 hours a day. And the 2 shifts would be expanded, and we go 24 hours. And what's your choice? Well, we said, hey, we'll go for 12 hours. So I was on an evening shift when this octet problem came up. And I asked if I could take off, and he said, no, you can't. Well, this friendly little colleague of mine, the 2 of us were running the whole show in the evening, he said, Gary, I can run 5 gallons all by myself. You go out and sing and come back, and then we'll go back on half gallons. Oh, hey, he's so nice. So we drove out and we sang. And when we started back, we had a flat tire on the car. and I was very late in getting back to work. By this time, the manager, Richardson, was standing outside the door to greet me about 11 p.m. And if I'd been him, I'd have fired me on the spot. He'd had to be called in to help Ralph run the show. But he just called, I just explained, I had a flat tire and so on, and I went in and I took over my job and continued to work. And I learned from this that if you want a job, if you are told by your boss to do something else, or to obey whatever the rules list he gives you, do it. I learned from that you listen to your boss if you like the job, and don't try and sneak around as we did that night. His son had problems as well. He would not listen to us and use the same procedure for washing the tanks. He he would just fill up these 200-gallon tanks of water and let them soak. But you know, when you're heating ice cream, you're pasteurizing it. In the old days, it used to form a little film on the sides of the walls of the tank, and it had to be scrubbed off with a fiber brush. He continued not to do it, so one of the days, my more stronger friends picked him up and dropped him in that tank until he was soaking wet, and then we threw him in the hardening room where the ice cream was. From that time on, we had no particular problems with him. And the boss didn't fire us as a result. Oh boy, I'm off the subject. All right, I may not be where I should be. I mentioned Meridian, Idaho. It's incredible to me that it was a little suburb, and now it's getting the second temple. From Meridian, Idaho, there was a little ward or branch out there that had a great pitcher, and I got to bat against him. He became a pitcher, and I'll think of his name in a minute, and I got to bat against him. Of course, I struck out. He became one of the great ones from the church, and became a coach down at BYU eventually. I think I've spent too much time on that. Education. I went 1 year at Boise Junior College. I learned another factor about whether or not you should be in the classroom all the time. As a senior in high school, when I just the last year in high school, I transferred from Franklin, or from the high school on the hill, to Boise, and I started in an American history class. When I switched to choir, I had to change teachers. When I changed the teacher in history, I took a quiz and flunked it. Well, this old teacher, Mr. Hayes, broke every chance he got, ran into the office and have his cigarette. I approached him and I said, my father takes a bunch of ag students out to Kansas City every year to the National Convention of the FFA. He would like to take me out this year. I'd be gone for a couple of weeks in school. You know what kind of a student you are in my class. You're an F student. If you go, you'll flunk the class. That was after one quiz. Well, I didn't go. Next year, I was at Boise Junior College for 1 year. Dad asked me again. So I went to my teachers. Oh, I was going to be a teacher by this time, a teacher of music. Future Teachers of America, I was a part of that emphasis. I was singing in the choir, and I was having a great time at Boise Junior College. Struggling a little bit with mathematics, but outside of that, I was doing pretty well. So the teacher said, by all means, it'll be the best 2 weeks you could spend. And one of them said, why don't you, while you're there, since you're in the FTA business, why don't you go call up the principal of the school system, the superintendent of schools in Kansas City, and talk to him about your interest in choral music. Oh, that was an interesting assignment. So I got out there and had 2 weeks of the most wonderful experiences. We went to meat packing plants and milk packing facilities and toured all kinds of things. I called up the superintendent. Oh, sure. He picked me up and took me around to several choirs in Kansas City to visit. Gave me royal treatment. I learned from that if a student ever comes to me and said, hey, I have an opportunity to do this, do it. Do it. It'll be a much greater experience for you than anything we can do here. Yes, I had dates in high school. And I had some wonderful dates. I had some wonderful friends. I remember on my first date, it was Rhea Hatch. And she lived a couple blocks from the high school, and I lived maybe 10 blocks from the high school where the dance was held. I think we were freshmen at the time. So I took my bicycle up, parked it on her front lawn, and we walked over to the high school for the dance. And it was so embarrassing because the music that was playing was from the discs, and it was, one of them was Kiss Me Once and Kiss Me Twice and Kiss Me Once Again. It's been a long, long time. Well, you know, there was no kissing in those days. I mean, that was, you know, that was, here dancing with a girl and song is Kiss Me Again, you know. It was a little bit more than I could handle. We had some special dates, and I guess the one that let's say I stuck with was Lorraine Dunn, the daughter of the stake president. Lorraine and I we were serious. I mean, we were never at the marriage point, but we were just permanent dates. But then the time came that we were to come to Utah State, and she was to go to BYU. We agreed we would only go with 3 people. Once 3 times, one person, 3 times, that's it. And that didn't work because we started going with others. And we drifted apart. Lorraine married Ron Carter, who wrote the books about prelude to the whatever it was, a series of books. And she's been a music teacher out in BYU East, out there in Virginia. And we've never contacted each other. So here I am at Utah State. Yes, my early dates were okay. I can't go with anybody more than 3 times. But then that was over, and I dated Alice Welty. I was at SAE, and my good friend was Dick Schwartz. And Dick Schwartz and I used to double date. And I went with Alice Welty for 1.5 years. She became Mrs. America. Never kissed her. We had fun together, but there was nothing serious between us. It was just a good date to go somewhere. I'll never forget the fact that we drove into one of their Alpha Chi Omega parties, and we thought we'd have some fun. We found a whiskey bottle somewhere, and we filled it up with cream soda so it looked like a colored whiskey. We decided we'd see what she would do. So somebody reached in the front glove compartment, pulled out this bottle, and she She thought it was really fun. So she took it in to embarrass us in front of all of her Alpha Omega sisters, you know. She really took it beyond where we had any idea of taking it. Well, one of the persons I double dated with for a year and a half was Fran Shoup. Now, Fran, I fell in love with her mother before I did her, because as we double dated, Dick Schwartz was going with her and I was going with other girls in the back seat of the car all the time. And so for a year and a half, this arrangement was going on. And she and Dick got a back problem. He was on the roundish side and I was on the skinny side. We used to kid each other. I'd call him Fatback and claim that every step he made on the sidewalk, there was a crack developed. And he would look at me and he said, "If you turn sideways, I can't see you." And I was a skinny character. I had to carry a young lady on the stage at Boise High when he did the production of The Fortune Teller. Had to carry this little girl on the stage. She was a flyweight, but about killed me. I was not strong. So anyway, back to our double dating. I ran for student body president once and lost. And then I ran the second time and won. The opportunity was presented to me by my fraternity, and the fraternities got together and organized together so that they'd all work together to see if I could get elected. And they did this because the returned missionaries were so organized. They were electing the student officer presidents. Previous year had been Dion Hubbard, who was a great leader. I have great respect for him. I ran against him and lost. So this year, I ran against the one who became a general authority and brother-in-law to Fran, Howard Burton, what was his name? Burton Howard. Burton Howard was my running opponent, and I beat him. He went on to become a general authority, and I don't think he minded at all that I won that election. His brother married Fran's sister. At any rate, as a student body officer, the student election, I set up the voting mechanism so that we could use IBM cards, and students would just have to fill in the little ovals areas for the candidates they wanted, and the election results were available in 45 minutes. Nobody had to count for long periods of time. So I got the election results, and I called up Fran to tell her that she had won an Associated Women student president. And her mother answered the phone. And I said, "Fran won the election." And she said, "Oh, you sweet thing." Wow. I think I fell in love with Fran's mother before I did Fran. So, 2 weeks after our election, President Madsen was fired from the university. Now, Dion and his people had met with the Board of Trustees under Thorpe B. Isaacson's chairmanship just 1 month earlier. And I was with him, and we sat there before the board, and President Madsen was sitting by Thorpe B. Isaacson. And we said, "We're concerned that there's rumor that the governor of the state, J. Bracken Lee, which we used to call J. Broken Leach, is moving to fire our president. And Thorpe B. Isaacs, oh, no. He put his arm around him, as I remember. No, he's doing a wonderful job as president. There's no, you students go back and do your studies and everything is fine, there's no problem whatsoever. And then 1 month later, I inherited the firing of President Lewis Lyndon Madsen. Well, it was a better time. And my father had written a letter to President McKay because he, at that time, appointed people on the board, and Thorpe B. Isaacson was one of them. My father said, "This is the first time in my history I will not be able to go to state conference and sustain the general authorities." Because Isaacson was the 5th counselor for President McKay. And Dad had witnessed things in the hallway which were just vicious in terms of anti-President Madsen. So Dion Hubbard and some of the students decided, hey, we're going to march on the Capitol building and demand to see the governor. We knew he was in charge of it. We had a lot of Iranian students around at that time, and so we were organizing this group of people to drive down a caravan of cars. And one of the Iranian students was saying, "Oh, this is exciting." I said, "What do you mean, exciting? You know what's going on?" He said, "No, I don't know what's going on, but it's exciting. It's just like it is at home." We had this array of cars on the way down, and the police, the highway patrol, met us and carried us in and moved us into the parking lot behind the Capitol building. At this point, the students had prepared an effigy of the executive secretary on the campus, and they'd hung him up in the back of the Capitol building. We demanded to go into the House of Representatives, and the students filled that house, and they were hanging ropes over the balcony to hang the governor. And the old student council with Dion in charge and I went up to the governor's office. He came in and sat down. He said, "Now, you students are just having a bit of spring fever. This didn't go over well." And Dion said, "Well, we're going to wait here until you come down and talk to us." And he turned to me and he said, "Would you go down and keep the students in order until we can have the governor come down?" So I went down and stood in the House Speaker's chair and said, "Now remember, he's the governor of the state." Boo, boo, boo. I led him in a few hymns. By the way, I led the Aggie hymn. I was the first one to lead that when the building was dedicated, the Union building was dedicated. And we sang a few songs, and the governor did come down. He promised to set up a commission to examine the whole situation and act appropriately. Well, all of this preceded just our time of leaving the university. We came home and we had to call the students on the campus, and the alumni president and I stood and said, "Hey, Utah State's still going to be here next year. Please come back," and all this sort of thing. We had a wonderful president assigned to work with us. Okay, I went to summer camp down in Fort Bliss, Texas. And when I came home, I heard that the president was available and meeting with the Board of Trustees on a Saturday, on a weekend when I wasn't working on the farm. And I was working at Paramount Dairy down in Ogden, or in Layton, Utah. for my Uncle Lynn. Well, I walked into the president's office on a Saturday morning, and the secretary was there. "Oh, you're the president. I'll go get President H. Aldous Dixon to come and talk to you, greet you." Well, he was next door with the Board of Trustees. By the way, President Madsen, President McKay, sent his board chairman for a 1-month vacation somewhere. And I don't know whether he ever worked for him again. But here came H. Aldous Dixon, sat down. I said, "I just wanted to meet you. I don't take." He said, "Sit down." I said, "You got a whole, they're big boys, they can take care of themselves. As to students, I want to meet and talk to." And he visited with me for almost an hour. And he became one of the finest solvers of problems. He was very ill one time in the president's home, and I approached him. I said, "There's going to be a smoke-in on campus. One of my senators in the administration is going to have a smoke-in on the student union." He said, "You know who it is?" I said, "Yes." "Could you ask him to come and see me?" I said, "I don't think so." He went in and stood at the foot of the bed of the president for about 15 minutes. He walked out, and there was never a word of a smoke-in on the campus after that. Okay, another thing happened when I came home from the military. I not only was interested in the president, but I wanted to see what was happening with Fatback. And see what was going on in his life, my fraternity brother. I should tell you that the prelude to this, he had a back problem and he was on the hospital. This is a year before this event that I'm talking about. He was in the hospital with his back at the D hospital in Ogden, a back injury. He said, "Gary, would you take my girlfriend to the sorority dance? She's in charge of all the recruits, or what they call, pledge trainer of the sorority. And I can't go, obviously. Would you take her to the dance?" I said, "Sure, I'll take her." So we went up into the sky room for the dance, and I took Fran to the dance, and there was this great big red heart. It was a Valentine's dance, and it was a cellophane paper in the heart. And the president of the KIO came up and said, "Fran, you're the pledge trainer. You're going to have to teach these girls how to kiss your boyfriend, their boyfriends. And so you need to go, you need to go by there." I said, "No way, Jose. Kiss my best friend's girl behind the," no. So someone else had to do it. Okay, with that prelude, now I'm back from military training, and I call up Fatback, and he isn't there. So I call up Fran, knowing full well that she would probably be with him, or at least know where he was. And she said, "No, I haven't seen him in a couple of months." Aha. Okay. Well, what are you doing this week? So I took her to a drive-in movie. And next week I called up and I said, "Well, how are you?" She said, "I've got a cold." I said, why have you got a cold?" Maybe I shouldn't put this on tape. She said, "Well, you didn't keep me warm." Oh. So on the second date, I put my arm around her. Our courtship grew from there, and along, I think it was later on in that fall, she she cooked a cake for me, and she was also sewing some socks for me. And every time I came, she would knit them a little bigger, so that when I finally got them, they would go clear up my ankle. They were so much bigger than my feet. But at any rate, she had this beautiful cake or pie, and we had a quarter of the pie, and we both wished that we would be married within the year without telling each other. We were engaged, and President Dixon knew we were so busy. He said, "How did you ever get any time to be engaged?" Because we were so busy in our office responsibilities. I got the engagement ring at Needham's. In those days, they were quite expensive. I had to pay $110 for half a carat. And Fran came in to my office once. The president had a nice office in those days. And I had a swing chair and everything. She sat down on my lap, and I said, "Dear, if you were going to get some eggs at the grocery store, would you want one big egg or would you want a bunch of little smaller eggs?" And she said, "One egg." So that helped me decide I wanted one nice jewel diamond. She was employed at the time, and I wasn't. So I had to pay for that ring on a monthly basis. And we weren't wealthy, but we were happy. So we planned for a July 19th wedding in the following year, 1954. And so the year went well. We had all of our responsibilities and activities in the student government and did some nice things. And then you wanted to talk about, and I've done a lot on love and marriage. I don't know, I think my choice of calling up Fran and finding out that she was available and interested was probably the best phone call I ever made. And from there, we've had a marvelous life. When we chose the marriage date, the 19th of July, we decided we would have their honeymoon up in Yellowstone Park, Jackson and Yellowstone Park. I graduated the year earlier in 1993, or 1953. I was the first one to serve as student body president as a graduate student. I don't think they've allowed it since. But I stayed on to do a master's, and because of the student government responsibilities, I couldn't do a master's, so we planned to go to Wisconsin afterwards on a PhD program, and after our marriage. So, myriads of things I could talk about. The night before our marriage, Fran and I knelt before the Logan Temple on the grass and pled with the Lord that we could have a successful, eternal marriage and have 6 children. We wanted 3 boys and 3 girls. The next day, we had a wonderful, in those days, everything was done on one day. My mother had arranged or finagled me to sing in the opening meeting in the temple where all the officiators were there. and all of the people to receive their endowments were there at the same time. She had arranged for me to sing a solo in that opening meeting. And this was, of course, 6-ish in the morning, I guess. So I sang, "This Is My Task," with my mother accompanying at the piano. Then we went through the regular procedures and received our endowments. And it was interesting, in those days there were some people that hadn't been properly instructed, and they thought that after the endowments were received, they were married, and they'd almost get out of the building before they were caught and brought, oh no, the ceiling still exists. We were sealed in that beautiful gold room that used to exist. Well, I guess it's been redone now, but the gold room was the biggest one that is there, and President Bell of the presidency sealed us. We had our honeymoon scheduled for the first night we'd spend in Montpelier, Idaho. The whole day, we had the endowment, the sealing, the reception. We had the first reception in the Union Building, Sage Room. And then afterwards, I was wiped out completely. We picked up some food, some clothing and various things, dressed, and took off across the canyon in our Nash car, Rambler. We got near the top of the canyon and I heard a crash in the trunk. Well, I carried all the tools in a wooden box that my dad had made, and all those tools had slipped off of a friend's suitcase and crashed in the trunk. We had streamers on our car, we had window markers, just married, and I went out and opened the trunk, and I put all the tools in the box back on that suitcase, including the keys to the car. Slammed the trunk, got in the car. Where are my keys? Where are your keys? A friend said, they're in my suitcase. There we sat, 11:30, midnight. The cars were going by, they'd see the streamers and they'd wave at us and honk and everything, you know. Finally, a guy came by with a car just like ours. I thought, oh, maybe the keys will fit. Well, they didn't. He said, but I've got a crowbar. We can tear out your back seat and get the keys, which he did. Tore the back seat out of our car, and we were able to get the keys and drive on. We got to Garden City, and I said, I've had it. I can't drive any further. So Fran had to drive over to Montpelier and carry me over the threshold. Well, not quite. That was our start. The very next day, we got the car up as far as Alpine, and it overheated. We got under the hood, and in those days, if you look at the front of the car, there's a belt that drives the generator. Behind the generator, there was a bushing to the water pump. The bushing had broken, so the water pump wasn't circulating the water, and the car boiled, and we were out of business. Fortunately, a co-worker of Fran's was working there at a motel. Fran's father, he worked here at the Buick agency, and he knew cars. And he came out, and he took one look, and he went out and he cut off a little piece of hose from a tank, a water tank in the washroom of the motel. And he took that little piece of hose and he put it in place of the bushing with bolts and everything to hold it in place, and we were in business. He said, now this hose doesn't have a lot of string reinforcement, so get one somewhere. If this happens again, it'll last longer. So we went all the way through the park. We had our honeymoon. We visited in several spots. We stopped in Idaho Falls on the way home. And then we were coming home on the 24th of July, and we got as far as Winder, Idaho, and the car boiled again. We got out and I replaced that bushing. It went 5 miles north of Preston, and it went out again. This time, when I was trying to correct it, I pulled the whole bushing out and the water ran out of the radiator. There we sat, the 24th of July. All of the service agencies were closed. It was a holiday. A farmer came by. He said, "Can I help you?" I don't know what we can do. He had a pickup truck. "Let me tow you to Logan." So he took his tire chains. You can imagine how close we were to the trunk of his pickup, to the back of his pickup. He put one over his towing ball and the other over the front end of our car, and he towed us all the way to Logan. You can imagine if he stopped, we'd have crashed into him. Pulled us up in front of Fran's home, and you should have seen the expression on her parents' face when they looked out and saw their daughter being towed home from her honeymoon with a car chain and a pickup truck. He left and wouldn't take anything for it. He was a real lifesaver. And I'm sure Fran's father thought, what has my daughter gotten into now? When we got home, we opened the letter from Uncle Sam, dated the same day of our marriage, ordering me into military service to report to Fort Bliss, Texas in September. That was our wedding gift from the military. The call to Fort Bliss, Texas, of course, was a big shock. We were planning to go to the University of Wisconsin. We'd been accepted to be a graduate researcher with Dr. Winder, who was from Salt Lake and who had developed some great instrumentation. I've always been interested in electronics. So we couldn't go. We had to put it off until the military was over. But when our work at Fort Bliss was finished, I wanted to go into radar school. And Major Stevenson, who was kind of our guide down there, said, "I think I can get you in it." So he said, "Yes, I can get you into the radar school. You just have to extend your time in the service to 4 years." I said, "No, I just won't get into radar, I guess." Interestingly enough, one of our radar officers later on in our military service was forced to go to radar school, and he only had 8 months left when he got out of service. But that's the way the military works. Fran is convinced that we were called there because of our ability to find her family, her mother's family. And we found her mother's family, and I'm sure she'll tell you about it. I have recorded the history of that family by putting out a book. This book is tells about the train that I built. And I included in this model train, Marklin trains, they're fabulous instruments. I've included into it all of the sites that we have remembered about the Schneider family. Now, I like to claim to be a Schneider. Oh, here it is. And I think you'll notice that I have some Edelweiss braces or suspenders. One daughter gave me this, another granddaughter gave me a black one. Edelweiss is our family theme song. Bless my family forever. We've probably made 50 trips over the ocean, back and forth between their family coming here and vice versa. I got this hat, mein Hut, es hat drei, because of this Austrian relationship. I had one of the friends' mother's cousins put these pins on it for me. So we've had some wonderful experiences, and I'm not going to go further into that because Fran will cover that in hers in great detail. But I have had interest in family history work. In 1980, I was railroaded into being the president of the Haight family. Now, this is Elder Haight's family and my mother. They were first cousins, and Elder Haight spoke at my mother's funeral. And Elder Haight set me apart as bishop. When he was an assistant to the 12 at the time, and I called up to tell him that I had been called to be the bishop of the Logan 22nd Ward, and at that time it was necessary for a general authority to ordain the bishops. So he set up a time and had me come down, and he ordained me a bishop and set me apart as bishop of the 22nd Ward. I hope I have time, but I'll go into how important it is to be set apart. He said, "What's that middle initial stand for?" I said, "Haight." He said, "Don't you forget it. Every chance you get, you use that middle name." Yes, sir. And I have not forgotten it. I used to call him up occasionally. "Elder Haight, this is Gary Haight Richardson. What's that middle initial stand for again?" He was proud of that name. He asked me once, "When did people stop using the name Hoyt? Our ancestor was Simon Hoyt, H-O-Y-T. I said, "No, Elder Haight, nobody likes to be called Haight anymore. There's a lot of Haights and many more Hoyts than there are Haights nowadays." Well, I was called to be the bishop of this 22nd Ward. And I served for less than a year when I received a call to go to New Zealand. Not a call from the church, but an opportunity. At the time I served at Swift & Company, which is a company I worked for before I came to Utah State. I spent all of my time trying to prevent the development of bacteriophage problems in cheese industry. They would destroy the cheese. The viruses would make the cheese towers just fall over in the cooler, or the milk would have to be dumped because the bacteria were dead after bacteriophage infection. So I developed a technique at Utah State for making the cultures more healthy. They wanted to know about it in New Zealand and gave me $5,000 to come down. Well, I approached President Baird of the stake, and I said, "President Baird, I've only been a bishop. I like this job. I don't want to leave it, and the Lord called me. But I've been asked to go to New Zealand." He said, "You take them. You go down there and take your family." I said, No, I can't afford it. $12,000, $15,000, I can't afford it. You take them. They've got plenty of bishops up here, and you go down and you take them to New Zealand. Being the greatest educational experience they could ever have. Well, it turned out to be the greatest educational and the greatest family bonding and the greatest professional experience that I ever did with that 6 months in New Zealand. The person who took us on our way down and oriented us was Ross Allen, Maureen Allen. They arranged all of our travel, and so they take a great deal of credit for this. Jay Monson was also a missionary down there. He sent us down there. He made sure we go down and take the whole family. Ironically, one of his converts baptized all of our children eligible in the New Zealand temple. So it was a priceless experience. Well, we came home, and they called Fran and me to go down, and I thought, oh, they're going to call me back as a, wait a minute, I'm not even down there yet. Before we left for New Zealand, 3 months before we left, President Baird called me in his office. He said, we'd like you to become bishop of the new Logan 27th Ward. I said, President, you've just told me to take the family to go to New Zealand. And we're going in 3 months' time. You're telling me now to become bishop of another ward? And he said, you know the people. You get them organized, and we'll let you go. Bingo. The family knew, and he knew, nobody else knew, but here we had to jump. Setting up the ward and ready to go in 3 months. I called up Elder Haight. Elder Haight, you set me apart as bishop of the 22nd Ward. Yes. Well, in 3 months' time, I'm going to be going to New Zealand. In the meanwhile, the bishops called me to be the bishop, the stake president called me to be the bishop of the 27th Ward. I don't need to be set apart again, do I? How about Wednesday morning at 9:30? Well, I learned why you need to be set apart for a change like that, for a particular ward. I was working in my closet one day, and I suddenly was struck. I knew who the next Relief Society president was going to be. So I met with my counselors, and I said, and we'd organized pretty much everything else. We just hadn't gotten to the Relief Society. I said, it's Kay Steed. Oh, no, Bishop, no. She's trained as a primary teacher. She should be with the young people, not the Relief Society. I said, well, let's go home and pray about it, and you tell me what you think on Sunday. They came in on Sunday. Said, okay, Bishop, go ahead, you call her. So in came Kay and Alan Steed, sat down, and I said, Sister Steed, the Lord wants you to be the Relief Society president of the Logan 27th Ward. She quietly opened her purse, pulled out a little note, and handed it to me. She said, I've known this for about 3 weeks. Same time I knew it in the closet. And these are the people I'd like for my counselors. I learned the importance of being set apart. When I came back from New Zealand, I was called in with Fran. I thought, oh boy, they're going to put me back as bishop or something. No. Fran, we'd like you to be the Stake Relief Society president. Oh, okay. We got home and she said, I want Kay Steed as my counselor. I said, no. She is the president of the Logan 27th Ward. And Fran said, that's when you were entitled to inspiration. Now I'm entitled to the inspiration. I want her. And I got her. And the two of them are still the greatest friends you'll ever see. They work together all the time in this AC Women Club and other programs. So that's one of the lessons I learned, that you need to be set apart and you need to respect the person who has the revelation. Following Germany, we had the opportunity to come back to Wisconsin and do a doctor's program. In Germany, our first daughter was born, Linda Marie. She has a Geburtsurkunde instead of a birth certificate. And she had the entitlement to become a German citizen until she was 18. And then she couldn't be able to make that decision anymore. And she has been a precious soul. We had 2 daughters join us in Madison when we were in graduate school. And there we had wonderful experiences. We participated in what the branch president called the golden age of music at Wisconsin. I had a choir of 26 voices. We sang the quartet from Rigoletto and the sextet from Lucia. I directed the Pirates and Penzance, Gilbert and Sullivan with the branch. We just had a wonderful experience. Following that, I served in Swift and Company for a couple of years. And then Tony Ernstom called up and asked me to consider a job up in Waukesha, Wisconsin with Dairyland Food Laboratories. It was there I was serving for 5 years, and we did some great things in those callings. One of the nice things I learned there was that if you behaved yourself as an employee, they would honor your transfer from one company to another. I was preceded by a man who graduated from BYU, got his doctorate from Wisconsin, but when he left before I arrived at Dairyland, he poisoned all of the employees on the management to the point that when I came, they said, if anybody decides to leave this company, we will give them 10 minutes to clear the premises. And I was facing that when I was asked to come by Tony Ernstom to Utah State. And I went in and I said, hey, I've got a job offer at Utah State. And they said, how much time do you need? Take a month, and when you get there, maybe we can support some of your research. And I learned, if you like your employment, don't poison your bosses. So anyway, it's been a wonderful experience. Now I want to show you one of my favorite trophies. I can hold it up here by my face, I think. This is a model of the first pH-controlled lactic culture tank manufactured in the United Kingdom. The results that our students did here at Utah State, and I was able to do in New Zealand, produced a technology for making cheese cultures so that there'll never be a problem with bacteriophage around the world in the manufacturing of cheese. The cultures now can produce acid and make the cheese without any fear of a virus attack. This was one of my favorite trophies. All we did was to learn how to feed the bacteria, how to close up the tank so that there could be no contamination from any source of any virus. Now this is common knowledge to doctors and people who work in the computer industry and so on. It's keeping out any kind of potential virus. We weren't doing that in the States, but we're doing it now, and this is one of my favorite trophies and one of the most successful projects I ever did. When we went to New Zealand, we were told by President Baird it would be the greatest experience we would ever have as a family. And Stephanie Haight, who does a lot of the choreography here in Nevada, our youngest, who was born in Logan, made the comment a few years ago, Dad, that was the greatest experience, the greatest bonding experience our family ever had. She was only 5 years at the time, 5 years old, but they were all together. We learned how to get along without fancy Christmas wrapping, with brown paper packaging tied up with strings. How to get along without 3 cars. We witnessed people down there that struggled just to have the kind of things I'm getting a phone call, so I've turned it off. It won't happen. I have to sketch it. Gives me a phone call. So that was the greatest spiritual family event we've ever had. We had 3 lovely daughters, and so every Monday night the missionaries would come over and teach us how to do the haka and and all the traditions of the Maoris and so on. We got to go to the first regional conference down there in Hamilton when the prophet came down, and Elder Haight had just been called, and he was down with them. So that was a priceless experience. I went back to New Zealand a few years later, and some of the dairymen down there showed me a flashlight that had 2 metal pins in the top, and it would be usable for making, estimating abnormal milk. It just had a red and a green light on the side of it. Well, I came home and I went to Westgore here, and I said, this is inadequate. We need one that can work across the whole range of contaminated or uncontaminated milk that is without somatic cells in it. So instead of having 2 little pins, they put in 2 pins that had about a couple inch difference between them so we get a better electronic signal. They put it all together in this tube, and now the dairyman can go by and squirt milk from the udder. I guess I lost my window here. Oh, here it is, okay. And so if they squirt the milk in from one teat, and then you get a red signal, that's the one that's mastitic. If the other 3s are white, then you know that that's the teat that needs to be taken care of. They put this together, and at the bottom, they had a picture of some cows. This is a picture of the oxen that are in the Logan Temple. They call this a mass detect because it's a mass detector. Detect mastitis in cows. They've sold about 10,000 of these. Interestingly, many of them have gone to Japan. We don't know why, because Japan doesn't have that big of a milking herd, but it's been a very effective. Now this is being built into the milking machines that are automated. Robotic milking machines have these built in. Well, I need to tell you about Durrell Thorpe. One of the problems in cheese making is being able to tell when the curd is strong enough to cut and run the hoops through. Well, there was no instrument to do it. If you ran something to cut it through, it was ruined. You couldn't make a second cut. So Durrell Thorpe was my bishop at the time, and I said, Bishop Thorpe, can you help me make an instrument that would measure milk coagulation? He said, well, I have an instrument that uses a certain device that can measure the forces inside of a block of granite. And I said, look, we're dealing with such tender things that can be broken so easily. We don't want to measure the forces, a strain gauge in granite. Well, he said, we can do it. And he made a little bridge-like item with a motor on it that would move this disc up and down very slowly, maybe 1 inch per minute, very slowly, and then raise it back up. And we put this in the test. We tested it out at Cache Valley Dairy, and it worked beautifully. People couldn't believe it worked so well. We got a patent on it, and everything was fine until the Japanese came up with a simpler device, as they usually do. Their device was just a little metal rod that stuck in the vat, and as the milk flowed by, the temperature would be taken away from that rod, and if the milk was solidified, then the temperature couldn't get away, and then the reading could be taken. So that's what happens to a lot of the inventions. They're superseded. I need to take you to, Fran and I had several teaching missions. And the first one was in Samoa. We did not have any idea we were going to go to Samoa for a teaching mission, but there was a wonderful lady during our visit to New Zealand who was the Relief Society president down there. Her name was Sister Gulliver. The Gulliver family just adopted us. They brought us to all their 21st year celebrations where they had the fire dancing and food all over the place in the church cultural hall. Excuse me. And they took such good care of us. They knew that we had turkeys on Thanksgiving, and there were no turkeys down there, so they brought us a couple of chickens. They brought us some wonderful powa shells all polished up that we could remember them by. Sister Gulliver was going to get me the director of the choir. Well, she didn't quite have that authority. It never happened. But years later, we found out that they needed a science teacher in the church college in Western Samoa. We decided we want to go meet the Samoan people. They're great. So we went to Samoa for a couple of years and I taught chemistry, physics, and biology. And my wife had more students than I did. She wound up with about 125 students on her last year of service. Well, the church college is the best one out of 20 in Western Samoa. Their school system is based on the New Zealand British system. Tests are given once a year, and they were using books that were just mimeographed, black and white, legal-sized paper with 25 pages to teach kids science for a whole year, prepared by one person, an Indian doctor in the school system in Samoa. I went to my country director, who had been the BYU Hawaii president, Dan Anderson. I said, can't we get some texts down here that are meaningful? Well, that was a big mistake, because we got them. And if you had a biology book in front of a bunch of biology students, they'd sit there during the whole lecture and go from beautiful page to page and watch everything. They'd never, in those old mimeographed books, they'd have a couple of hyacinths. One would be blue and one would be pink on side by side, but they were in black and white and they were improperly printed. You couldn't teach people stuff like that. My theme down there was visualize everything. So Brother Anderson said, sure, let's get that. So they got some American sales book people down there to visit with us, and we got chemistry books, we got physics books, we got biology books. You couldn't let the students take them home because you'd never see them again, a lot of them. So they just had to work with them in the class period. And they were very faithful in working at them, and it was such a great thing that we were able to do. I think they got them all over the South Pacific, but I was invited to go down to Tonga for 10 days and teach them my theme of visualizing everything. And Brother Anderson said, well, the good news is the country director came in with his fine mat tied around his waist, and he sat there with the principal of the high school, and they watched how I taught for a while, and they wanted me to come down. And so Dan Anderson said, now the good news is that we'll pay your way to Tonga for 10 days. The bad news is you have to take your wife and you have to pay for her. Well, those were precious days. We had wonderful experiences. They gave me a ham license free down there, like to run the radio that I was running in Samoa. I'd received a ham license there. So I have 2 ham licenses in the South Pacific, and got them easier than any other license I ever got. Well, I brought a couple of things along to show you. This is called a fouet. In English, that's fly swatter. And the fouet is used by the talking chief. Now, the chief of the village allows the talking chief to speak for him. If he makes a mistake, he corrects it by putting his fouet on the other shoulder. Now, English translation for the fouet is fly swatter. Now, I need to show you one other gadget, and that's the to'o. The to'o is the talking stick. I'm sure you won't be able to get all of this in the picture at one time. Well, I'll just move it by you at this point. This is the to'o. I don't know how the Samoan wood carver can do this without a lathe. Maybe they do use a lathe, but they don't know how. But it doesn't show like it's made with a lathe. They don't say they've got a lathe. But this to'o, by the way, our mission president down there was a Samoan at the time we left, and his name was To'o. The to'o is the talking stick, talking chief's stick. He used it by standing in front with his fouet in front of the fale, announcing the arrivals to the wedding and the other activities in the fale at the time. Brother Fa'alinga just arrived at the wedding carrying only 1 can of corned beef. The next one to arrive, he arrived with 3 cans of corned beef. So everybody in the village would know who was bringing what to the wedding. I love this to'o, and we show it to all of our grandchildren. And when I brought it home, some of the others that received it, some of the other mission couples, would cut it in half and put a dowel in here so they could put it back together when they got home. Fran said, "No, you're not going to cut that in half." Okay, so I bring it this way, and Air New Zealand knows all about it. When I get to Los Angeles, Air Delta has no idea what this is. So the people, when I came up to the checkout, they said, "That's a weapon. You cannot put that on an airplane." I said, "Well, what do I do?" And she didn't mention a ski package or anything like that. She said, "Well, the stewardess is going to come along. He'll ask her." The stewardess came along, and she said, "Oh yeah, we can put that in our cabinet up in the front of the cabin." So we did, and flew home, and she got it out of the cabin and gave it to me. She says, "Here's your cue stick." That's my to'o story. All kinds of students exist. We had ringleaders that scared me to death. Kids that had families in Los Angeles, they learned how to organize gangs, and I'd have to say to them, "Take off that red bandana off the red." I said, "What for?" I said, "Take it off, put it in your backpack." "Why?" I said, "Because I asked you to." We had students that, most of them were just wonderful. They had to wear this uniform all the time. One of them came in, he went, "Brother Richardson, can you help me find a job?" one that doesn't involve computers. I said, wait a minute. Let me take you over and show you what some of the other things computers do. The only thing they were doing was word processing as far as he knew. Never got a chance to, but later on, he came to me a year later. He said, can you help me get a job? I said, do you still hate computers? Oh yeah, I can't stand I said, almost everything in Samoa now is involving computers. You need to get involved with computers. Well, our next trip, our next teaching experience was in Hawaii, and at the University of BYU, Hawaii, University of Hawaii, let's see, how do I say this? Brigham Young University, Hawaii, gives their faculty members a new computer every year. While I was teaching there, I got a new computer, and I had problems getting adjusted to it, just like President Uchtdorf talked about at the last conference. So I called up the IT division. Would you send someone over here to help me? Here came one of my top biology students, Sinale Te'o. She came in to show me how my computer worked. So there were students in my classes in Samoa that have done marvelous things. As I've already mentioned, Fran and I went back to Hawaii in 2000. We arrived 30 minutes before the bell rang on the Y2K shutdown. No one was to fly after midnight, and the Y2K event occurred. Well, I knew I was supposed to start teaching the first term right after the first of the year. I was supposed to start teaching chemistry. And I was substituting for the man who just retired. He taught it for 40 years, Dale Hammond. Boy, he was a brilliant teacher. He was delighted that I was going to come and help him teach. He said, can you teach chemistry? I said, well, I've been teaching all these years, and I'm sufficient chemistry, and so I think I can do it. So he gave me 3 courses to teach, beginning the 1st of 2000. So I waited for my call. They were going to pay me, but Fran wanted to make it a mission, and I agreed, let's make it a mission. So we had to go on as a missionary rather than as an employee of the college. So they canceled my flights, and I waited. No one gave me a flight, so I called up Murdoch Travel, and I said, hey, you're supposed to get me over there for teaching. And I said, the missionary over there, and she said, oh, we can't get you over. We don't have any flights available for missionaries. Can you wait till after the first of the year? I said, ma'am, I'm supposed to teach 3 courses in chemistry beginning on the 5th of January. I need to get there to prepare. She said, oh, you're a teacher? I said, yes. Well, President Hinckley said we get teachers there no matter what the cost. She got us on a plane that arrived just 30 minutes before Y2K shut down. Bless her heart. And I started to teach these courses, and one of my friends here said, I would never accept a job like that. And I don't think I should have accepted it either, because it had been 50 years since I had beginning chemistry, and I had to teach people how the energy levels in integrated circuits, freshmen in chemistry, and teach them about the DNA, which had been unraveled at the time I was a student, 50 years earlier. Anyway, it was a great experience. And we had done all of our teaching, right? We came home, and Our stake president was Kent Wallace. Now, you need to know about Kent Wallace. He is the closest to the spirit of any stake president I've ever known. He was our bishop at the time we were in the ward up there where we are now, in the Lunston Park ward. He told us that he received a witness from the Spirit that he was going to be the bishop of our ward before he even lived in it. So he thought, well, I better get up there and buy that house we've been looking at. He bought the house, he became the bishop. Later on, he received a witness before anybody on earth knew it, including the visiting general authorities, that he was going to be the stake president. So he went to the temple. Yes, he got the stake president message. Or he got the call. He knew he was going to be the stake president. He wrote me an email. Gary, I feel impressed that you should serve another teaching mission. Fran and I broke into tears because we knew from him, number one, that he is closer to the Spirit than anybody that I know of. Number two, I'm not close enough to the Spirit to know that. We had a call, we had an opportunity to go down to visit BYU Provo. And Rod Brown, who had been our dean here, he'd been Assistant Secretary of Agriculture, and then he came to be Dean of Life Sciences at Brigham Young University. I was trying to introduce him to a product that could be used in the welfare programs, a humanitarian effort. I said, you know, our stake president wants me to go on another teaching mission, but you don't take missionaries down here, do you? He said, no, we pay them. Can you help us? And I had one of the most fantastic experiences. Fran and I got an apartment. We stayed 5 days down there and 2 days on the weekends here. And I got to teach 100 students the essentials of food science. Probably one of the greatest opportunities that I'll ever have in this life to teach the subject I've been trained to teach. I found that there was more on the plate than just ice cream and cheese. There's meat, there's baked goods, there's drinks, there's all kinds of things on the plate. Vegetables, oh, that was a marvelous. And they had a whole bunch of PowerPoints that had been prepared that I could use as a basis, and I added to it my testimony of a lot of things about foods, and I wove it into those PowerPoint slides. That was a choice experience, and I'll be eternally grateful to President Wallace for that great opportunity. Now, is to add, or that is that Church is giving us now, is to add things to our personal histories to, is this ready to run out? Okay. Our personal histories to the family tree, and I have done so. I wrote this about my grandfather. This book is called Remembering Charles Levitt, and Mary Estella Elison Haight, my grandparents. It's a 63-page book, and I have put this on the web. I'm also adding histories of the Richardsons, of my great-grandparents. My daughter, Linda, has been putting a lot of pictures on of this family onto the family tree. I think it's a great thing. I'm trying to get the Sons of Utah Pioneers to do their memorialization on the family tree rather than in a building down in Salt Lake City. This way they're going to be available for everybody. Now, I should wind up with my testimony of the greatness of the Lord's work and the fact that we have ministering angels on both sides of the veil. Elder Haight was a spark plug of our organization. In 1996, we held our reunion at the Rock Chapel in Farmington, Utah. At that point, I had decided, and so had my officers decided, Shirley Carmack being one of them, Robert Haight, his son, being another one, that this would be the last major reunion for this organization. We would invite people to go down and have sub-organizations on different points, on their own, different families. In '96, his brother, his baby brother, had finally obtained his endowment. And his wife had been Episcopalian, and she would not allow his participation in church, and the children were all raised out of the church and so on. And so at that point, when he and Elder Haight and his brother came in, I said, here's Elder Haight and here's Elder Haight, so we can start the meetings. At that point, I advised that we would hold this as the last Haight reunion. Please go down and hold sub-reunions for your own families. And then I made the mistake of giving the microphone to Elder Haight. Now, Gary, I wonder how truly inspired you were when you decided to shut this organization down. How many of you would like to go to Oakley, which is where we always went on the alternate years? 3 years from now, would you like to go to Oakley and have another reunion in Oakley, Idaho? And of course, all of my family had been told we were going to, what would you do in a case like that? Elder Haight pulled the carpet out from under us and we held another reunion. We doubled the numbers in 1999 when we went up there to Oakley, Idaho. Well, we knew we couldn't stop then. We had to hold another one in 2002 back in Farmington. So in order to do that, we decided to have a planning meeting. Let's have a planning meeting at Elder Haight's alumni house in Logan. And so the officers agreed that that's what we would do. Well, then word came that they couldn't make it. They couldn't be here. So I called Elder Haight and I said, Elder Haight, this is Gary Haight Richardson. What's that middle initial stand for again? And I said, we have a problem. Not too many people can come to this planning meeting on 2000 up here. He said, and I was calling at the time from Hawaii. He said, well, let's do it anyway. I said, why don't we meet down in your office? No, let's not meet down. Let's go up there anyway, even if it's just a few showed up. Well, quite a few showed up. And we had a meeting, a video conducted in which he described all of his football experiences and his playing the violin and graduation and some great experiences. And we had this planning meeting. It was such a great event that I wanted to send a copy of this video back to his brother who was suffering from a cancer problem in his hip, and his wife up in Twin Falls, Idaho. So I did so. I sent the tape, went back to Hawaii, and 1 month later, That tape came all the way back to Hawaii because I didn't have the street number on the tape of one of the biggest assisted living homes in all of Magic Valley, Idaho. And I was so mad at the postman, I thought that's the dumbest thing anybody could ever do. I called up Ludwig, his brother, Ludwig. Ludwig, what's the street number of the stupid place where you live? And he told me it was 1920 or something like that, and I said, I've got to send this tape to you of your brother's historical discussion, and I'm so mad at the postman. He said, you know, David and Ruby were up here last week to celebrate my birthday. I said, oh, great. Are you going to be celebrating his birthday next month down in Salt Lake? He said, no. David is going with the prophet to Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham? For the Temple of Dedication in Birmingham? I've got to get a hold of him before he goes. And we talked a while. I sent an email to Elder Haight, and I was afraid he wouldn't get it or wouldn't read it or something. His secretary had to read everything because his vision was terrible. And he said, I called on Monday. Again, I got the same reaction. He was answering the phone because his secretary was busy reading other things. And I told him, Elder Haight, you need to know that 104 years ago, your favorite uncle, Charles Levitt Haight, my grandfather, opened the Birmingham, Alabama mission, after which the previous elders had been driven out of town, put in prison, driven out of town for tracting. And he said, oh, my uncles went to the South Pacific. I said, not your favorite Uncle Charles, my grandfather. And it said, further, they received all the greatest, they were put in the greatest hotels, and they had the greatest food and everything, were treated royally, and all without purse or script. I said, you need to know that your uncle opened that mission where you're now going to help. And there was a picture on the, he didn't go to many of these. He went to those because they were celebrating their 70th anniversary. So he and Ruby went out with the prophet on his plane. So then I started putting things together. He wrote a letter back and said how much it meant to the prophet and the priesthood leaders there. He was able to share that story, that the Haight uncle had opened that mission. Well, I think what happened was my grandfather, Charles Levitt Haight, on the other side of the veil, wanted him to know of what happened in Birmingham 104 years ago. And that's what prompted that mailman to require me to put a street number on it and start this whole process. Ludwig took good care of his family, of his wife, and when she died, he gave her a proper Episcopal funeral. I called and I said, I understand you're thinking of going to Boise now to do family history. Yes, I'm not thinking about it, I'm doing it. And 1 year after her death, Ruby and David Haight flew to Boise, where Ludwig knelt on one side of the veil and Ruby on the other. And David sealed. Ludwig and Lucille, time and all eternity. That's the kind of Haight family activities that I think are precious. I have a firm conviction of the truthfulness of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm fully convinced that of all the people we need to love in this life, we need to love Christ with all of our heart, might, mind, and strength, and his Father. We need to remember him, keep his commandments, and honor the covenants we've made. I have a conviction that Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God. No one could have written and done what he did. The scholars are still working to assemble the marvelous things he wrote in 39 years of life. I have a testimony that the truths of the gospel must be kept and grow in our hearts. And that the problem with the world today in which we live is that we have not done this. We've taken God out of our government, our cities, our schools. We've done all we can to take the Ten Commandments out of existence. I think the world today has as their gods people like Bill Nye, and the people who believe in evolution. I like the conclusion of Elder Eyring's father, who became the president of the American Chemical Society, Henry Eyring, who concluded, the most important thing in all of this is to know that the Lord is in charge of his universe. Not exactly how he did it, whether or not some form of evolution was involved during the process of the creation, and whether it's involved now, is a moot point. If he were to explain what happened, what he did, I probably wouldn't understand much of it. He's all-knowing. I just work here. I think that's the attitude we need to take and continue our testimony growing by honoring the covenants we've made. The best choice I ever made was to pick Fran Shoup as my bride. We've been blessed with a precious offspring, and I hope I may remain worthy to keep her and keep my family together forever. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.